Thank you, Ruggero, for the floor, and thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to listen to so many thoughtful speeches. The center of my talk is the idea of human dignity, which I am deeply involved in the topic I'm going to discuss, namely digital violence. Actually, I think that whenever something negative, harmful is present in a system, the major effort should be devoted not so much to the encroaching variables to be checked, but rather to the positive variables always present in a system, whose enhancement can outweigh and thus drive away the negative ones, simply not leaving space to them. Thus, one possible response to the enormous problem of digital abuse should consist in the strengthening, enhancement, and protection of human dignity, as well as in fostering awareness of such endowment in the center I will try to describe. Pope Francis has referred to human dignity so many times. Just only in the apostolic exhortation Evangelii Gaudium, human dignity and dignity occurs 23 times. 23 times. Every discourse on human dignity requires some assessment of the meaning of this multifaceted, really spawning idea, which makes up the mainstay of the recognition of human rights in most constitutions. I try to move the slide. I don't know how I can. Yeah, okay. Back, okay. Actually, as stated by Judge Aaron Barak, human dignity, I quote, is the humanity of a person as such. And underlying that humanity is a person's free will and autonomy. It is a person's freedom to write his life story. However, human dignity is a mobile idea, a spawning principle, as said. In its richness, it is clarified and deepened through the understanding stemming from any field of human experience and scholarship, especially whenever these fields can bear witness of and denounce negation of the humanity of individuals or groups. As stated once by the international scholar and judge Antonio Cassese, ex injuria oritur ius, namely, it's drawing on the experience of offenses and injustice that law can better define its principles, bound to protect effectively every person, especially the most vulnerable ones. Especially these perspectives of the homo invinculis, the bonded jailed man, is extremely thought-provoking to this effect. The mandate in Italy, at least, criminal justice and punishment to strive for a possible rehabilitation of every offender is as such a development of the same idea of human dignity, as this key principle assumes that every individual, whatever crime she has committed, simply as human being can rewrite her story from the start. It's just the idea of dignity we received as inheritance from the humanist and Renaissance culture. The same which inspired, for instance, Pico della Mirandola, when he described human beings as capable of any metamorphosis to transform herself in all conceivable creatures, either animals, plants, or things, through her ingenious mind and imagination. Moreover, from human beings, we can and must thus expect also a radical discontinuity in the course of their lives. And this is a potential of metamorphosis which makes up an essential element of their dignity. This perspective is somewhat even trickles out of recent judgments of the Italian Constitutional Court, where the openness to future changes of own personality is admitted in spite of the criminal category or classification inherent in the charge for which people have been convicted and detained. I quote, "The conduct subsequent to the crime committed is projected into the future and can mark a radical discontinuity in the person's attitudes and is in her social relationship." End of quotation. Such feature of human dignity should be put to good use while discussing that particular kind of violence, which is digital violence. Human dignity is offended as such whenever an attack besets comprehensively the humanity of an individual, and I deem, therefore, that the quintessential offense against human dignity is violence. As aptly stated by the Constitution of Greece, Article 7, torture, any bodily maltreatment, impairment of health, or the use of psychological violence, as well as any other offense against human dignity, are prohibited and punished as provided by law. Its violence is perhaps the most visible and clear-cut aggression upon human dignity. Digital violence, albeit not carried out through physical means and not being strictly an attack to the body, makes no exception. Here you find many definitions, official definition or scholarship definition of digital violence. I have no time to comment or analyze these different definitions. This is a scholarly one. Then we have the definition of hate speech, which is part of the digital violence from this United Nations document, Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech. And then we have the other document in the additional protocol to the Convention on Cybercrime 2003. But, however, we should be aware that before any single attack or actus reus is committed on the web, a kind of subtle and quite obnoxious violence is just inherent, even ubiquitous, in the current digital environment. It may be called algorithm violence, and has two relevant features partially connected to each other. On the one hand, numerous studies attest that the algorithms that govern the logical visibility of the contents on the web favor and amplify digital violence in the strict sense. On the other hand, but I would say primarily, the handling of algorithms based on user profiling hinders effective pluralism and therefore the freedom of expression and the full development of the human person, using the terminology of the Italian Constitution. Actually, the automated processes of indexing content based on user profiling contribute to viralization as well as to the trivialization of offensive contexts. The posts containing incitement to violence and discrimination, intimidation, and denigration, as intrinsically sensationalist, in fact risk activating the selective function of digital platform, thus increasing the number of users and therefore the likelihood that they will be further appreciated and shared. While contributing to the media success of such contents, they also support the mechanism of moral disengagement, and in particular the so-called spread of responsibility. The more likes and shares a post gains, the less the user feels responsible for appreciating or sharing it, thus contributing to the normalization of digital violence. The more frequently hateful contexts appear, the greater the effects of the user's addiction to verbal violence. As the experts explain, the user finds himself in a sort of self-referential bubble, defined as a filter bubble, or according to another quite revealing metaphor, in an echo chamber. That is, in a virtual space in which the opinions he has already expressed or theories he has sought or shared are echoed. In this way, haters and conspiracy theorists rejection of fact-checking is facilitated by the scarcity of alternative content they can encounter, and their delusional beliefs are strengthened and confirmed. In this sense, new technologies, and especially the internet, help people to listen to the opinion of other individuals of the same mentality and to isolate themselves from different ideas, thus creating a fertile ground for polarization. All these features somewhat seem to resemble in the digital era what Pierre Bourdieu already remarked about televisions many years ago, namely the might of this media of enclosing consumers within a cognitive cage whose bars are made either of commonplaces or of iconic, hypersemiotic, impressive messages which replicate at high rate and spellbind audiences. In this constrictive power lies the prime threat to human dignity, which is affected before and apart from any specific content or hate content, and just in the pinning of people to an everlasting confirmation bias, and thus in the binding of them to the burden of their current or past views and tastes. This binding force thwarts seriously the ability of people to change their minds, to look at the world with different eyes, to effect a radical discontinuity in the course of their lives. That marks our digital, marks their dignity, their possible discontinuity in the course of their life. Briefly, it hinders to cherish those attitudes which are the prerequisite for creativity and, I dare to say, for a satisfying, even happy life. In this regard, there are many positions in official boards, for instance, European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, on preventing unlawful profiling. This is a document of December 2018. I have no time to comment or read this paper, this slide. We can also mention many principles of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, in particular the European Union Fundamental Rights Charter, where dignity is mentioned, and also non-discrimination, protection of personal data. In the European Convention of Human Rights, Article 8, right to respect for private and family life. But I think particularly interesting this document of the General Data Protection Regulation, where at the Article 22, the first line, the data subject shall have the right not to be subject to a decision based solely on automated processing, including profiling, which produces legal effects concerning him, her, or similarly significantly affects him, her. Skip this one. My last 5 minutes I will devote to some modest proposals on as possible remedies to this problem. The first, of course, these proposals have upsides and downsides, but there are no simple solution for complex problems. And in the paper for the proceedings, I will discuss more deeply these upside and downsides. An European regulation on internet service providers, at least with reference to providers of social networking services, which derogates or exceeds that currently outlined by the Electronic Commerce Directive. Second, with a view to containing digital violence in the strict sense, we could reflect on the opportunity to regulate anonymity online. Third, overcoming or at least vigilance on algorithmic profiling, especially indexing mechanisms based on the sensationalistic nature of the context and on user profiling. These are regulatory proposals, of course, and as Stiglitz Monday said, regulating virality is not the same as denying free speech, and much of the damage of social media is related to virality. In any case, we all, and Professor Lorusso said very well, and also Professor Van Dijk, that there are limitations to the efforts that we can get through regulation. The real way to tread is to stimulate those variables whose announcement can outweigh and thus drive away the negative ones, simply not leaving space to them, and thus favoring flexibility, namely those resources discussed Monday, like relational personalism and the virtue of deep learning among them. In a word, dignity, namely the person's full freedom to always, always write and rewrite his life story without being pinned to what is written, said on the web. Thank you a lot for your attention.